The morning my son-in-law told a delivery driver to leave the new refrigerator in his kitchen, something inside me went very still. I did not correct him. I simply stood there in the hallway, my hand resting against the wallpaper I had chosen 27 years ago, pale blue with tiny climbing roses, and listened as the men wheeled the enormous stainless steel appliance past the family photographs. One of them asked, "Where do you want it, sir?" "Sir, not me, not the woman whose name was on every document tied to this house. Him." "It goes right here," Emmett said casually, tapping the tile with his shoe. "Careful with the floor, we just had it redone." The word echoed louder than the scrape of the dolly wheels. I remember noticing small, absurd details in that moment, the faint smell of fresh cardboard, the hum of the ceiling fan, the way sunlight pooled across the kitchen table my late husband had built with his own hands. I opened my mouth, closed it again. Sometimes the heart recognizes danger before the mind allows it. At the time, Emmett had been living with me for just under 3 months. Temporary, my daughter had said. "It's only until the new job settles," she promised, squeezing my hands across the cafe table. I believed her. Because when your only child looks at you with the same wide brown eyes she had as a little girl, belief becomes almost automatic. But that morning, hearing him speak as if the walls themselves belonged to him, a quiet unease slid into my chest. And once unease enters a home, it rarely leaves quietly. Before all of this, my life was gentle, predictable, the kind of life you build carefully after surviving great loss. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 58 years old, a retired elementary school librarian and a widow of 11 years. My husband, Thomas, died on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. One moment he was trimming the hedges, the next he was gone. People talk about grief as if it is loud, sobbing, breaking, collapsing, but mine was mostly silent. It lived in the empty chair at the dinner table, in the untouched side of the bed, in the way no one said my name anymore quite the way he used to. Still, I learned to live again. This house helped. Thomas and I bought it when our daughter Marin was 5. It wasn't grand, just a 2-story colonial at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, but it held laughter in its bones. Every doorway carried pencil marks where we measured Marin's height. Every floorboard knew the rhythm of our family. After Thomas passed, many people suggested I downsize. Too much house for one woman, they said gently, but they didn't understand. This wasn't square footage, it was memory, so I stayed. Over the years, the house grew peaceful. Mornings meant coffee by the bay window while sparrows argued in the maple tree. Afternoons meant tending to my small rose garden. Evenings meant classical music drifting softly through rooms that asked nothing of me except presence. And Sundays were for Marin. She visited almost every week, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing but stories from her busy life as a dental hygienist. She had always been thoughtful that way. When she first told me about Emmett, I remember noticing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, a habit she had whenever she felt hopeful. "He's steady, Mom," she said. "Kind, responsible." I met him 2 weeks later. He arrived precisely on time, carrying a bottle of red wine and a firm handshake. "Mrs. Ellis," he said politely, "thank you for having me." He looked respectable, neatly trimmed beard, pressed shirt, careful posture. During dinner, he complimented my cooking twice and insisted on washing the dishes. I thought then, my daughter has chosen well. Looking back, I wonder if goodness sometimes knows how to imitate itself. They married the following spring in a small garden ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just white chairs, string lights, and the smell of lilacs. Thomas would have liked Emmett, I told myself that day. Marin seemed so certain, so safe. For the first 2 years, their marriage appeared happy. They bought a townhouse across the city, adopted a nervous golden retriever named Poppy, hosted game nights where laughter spilled onto the porch. Then slowly things shifted, not dramatically, just enough for a mother to notice. Marin called more often but sounded more tired. Emmett changed jobs twice. There were murmurs about financial strain, though she brushed them off. Just growing pains, she would say. I didn't pry. Children deserve the dignity of their own struggles. Then came the evening everything tilted. Rain tapped steadily against my windows when Marin showed up unannounced, her mascara faintly smudged. Emmett stood behind her, carrying 2 suitcases. Poppy trembled on a leash. "Mom," Marin said carefully, "we need a small favor." Of course they could stay. What kind of mother hesitates? "It's temporary," Emmett assured me. My new position starts next month. Once the paychecks stabilize, we'll find another place. Temporary, such a harmless word. The first weeks were almost pleasant. Marin helped cook. Emmett mowed the lawn without being asked. We fell into an easy rhythm, shared dinners, quiet television evenings, the soft patting of Poppy's paws across the hardwood floors. But subtle things began rearranging themselves. Emmett moved his coffee mug into the cabinet where Thomas used to keep his. He replaced my shower head without asking. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store to find the living room furniture shifted into a configuration I did not recognize. Better flow, he explained with a quick smile. I told myself adjustment requires flexibility. Yet flexibility, I would soon learn, can be mistaken for surrender. Then one Saturday, he installed a digital thermostat. It's more efficient, he said, handing me a pamphlet I hadn't requested. The house temperature was no longer something I controlled, a small thing, but homes are made of small things. And ownership often begins quietly. Still, the moment that truly unsettled me came late one night. I woke thirsty and padded toward the kitchen. Voices drifted from the den, Emmett's voice low, deliberate. Well, eventually it'll be ours anyway, he said. A pause, then Marin, softer, Emmett, not now. I froze in the dark hallway. Eventually it'll be ours. Perhaps I misunderstood. Perhaps exhaustion distorts hearing. I returned to bed telling myself not to invent storms where none existed, but doubt once planted grows roots. And by the time that refrigerator arrived, something inside me already knew. Temporary had overstayed its welcome. I did not sleep well the night after the refrigerator arrived. There is a particular kind of wakefulness that comes when the spirit senses change, not dramatic change, not yet, but the quiet rearranging of ground beneath your feet. The house sounded different. Or perhaps I was simply listening differently. Floorboards sighed as someone walked to the bathroom around midnight. A cabinet shut too firmly, the low murmur of the television long after I had gone to bed. When you live alone for years, you memorize the language of your home. Every creak becomes familiar, every settling noise expected. Now the rhythms were no longer mine. Still, I told myself this was generosity in action. Families make space for one another. That is what love does. The next morning, I found Emmett at the kitchen island with a stack of papers spread neatly before him. He had always been organized, almost impressively so, but something about the scene felt official. "What are you working on?" I asked, pouring my coffee. "Budgeting," he replied without looking up. "Trying to get everything under control." Everything, such a broad word. I nodded and sat across from him. The new refrigerator hummed softly behind us. After a moment, he slid one of the papers toward me. "I've been thinking," he said, tapping the column with his pen. "Since we're all living together now, it might make sense to consolidate certain household expenses." I read the page, utilities, property taxes, maintenance projections. My eyes paused there, property taxes. "I've always handled those," I said gently. "Of course," he answered quickly, offering a reassuring smile. "But transparency is healthy, don't you think? We should run the house like a team." Run the house. I folded my hands around my mug to steady them. There is a peculiar discomfort in hearing your private life described with corporate language. Marin entered then, still in her robe, hair loosely braided. "Morning," she said, kissing my cheek. For a moment I relaxed, but Emmett wasted no time. "I was just telling your mom we should open a shared household account, makes everything cleaner." Marin hesitated only slightly. "That sounds practical," she said. "Practical?" I noticed she did not look directly at me when she spoke. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I'm comfortable managing the bills as I always have. You two can contribute however you feel is fair." Emmett leaned back in his chair. "I just believe clarity prevents misunderstandings." Something about the way he said it made me feel as though I had already misunderstood something, though I could not yet name what. The conversation drifted elsewhere, but a quiet tension lingered like humidity before a storm. Over the following weeks, Emmett's presence expanded in ways that were difficult to challenge without sounding ungrateful. Packages arrived addressed to him, tools, storage systems, framed prints. He mounted a large calendar near the pantry titled Family Schedule. My weekly bridge club appeared on it without anyone asking me. Even my gardening time was penciled in. One afternoon, I found him speaking to a contractor in the driveway. "Yes, we're considering knocking out that wall eventually," he was saying. Opening the kitchen into the dining room would increase property value significantly. Property value. Eventually, I stepped outside. Emmett, I said evenly, what wall are we discussing? He turned, unfazed. Oh, just exploring options, never hurts to think ahead. Think ahead. I looked at the brick facade, the white shutters Thomas had repainted every other summer, the climbing roses just beginning to bloom. This house had never been an investment, it had been a life. I'm not planning renovations, I told him quietly. He studied me for a moment, not rudely, but with a calm persistence that made refusal feel oddly unreasonable. Plans change, he said. That evening, Marin seemed distracted at dinner, pushing green beans around her plate. Afterward, as we rinsed dishes together, I spoke softly. Sweetheart, are things all right between you and Emmett? She nodded too quickly. He just likes structure, Mom. It makes him feel secure. And you? She dried a plate longer than necessary. I like that he takes initiative. Initiative, the words were sensible, adult. Yet something in her voice sounded rehearsed. I wanted to ask more, but motherhood sometimes requires restraint, knowing when questions might close doors instead of opening them. So I kissed her forehead and let the silence settle. A few days later, the mail brought something that made my chest tighten. A bank envelope addressed not only to Emmett and Marin, but to Emmett Whitaker, resident, not guest, not temporary occupant, resident. It is remarkable how much power a single word can hold. That afternoon, I walked through the house slowly. My house. Yet traces of Emmett were everywhere now, his leather briefcase near the staircase, his preferred cereal filling an entire shelf, his shoes aligned precisely beside the door. Even the scent had shifted. Less lavender polish, more sharp cologne. Homes absorb people, and sometimes they begin to reflect whoever occupies them most confidently. The real turning point came on a quiet Tuesday. I returned from the garden with dirt still beneath my fingernails and heard Emmett on the phone in the living room. Yes, he was saying, long-term stability matters to me. I'm not interested in renting again. A pause. No, the house situation is solid. Solid, I stepped back before he noticed me. Later that night, unable to quiet my thoughts, I retrieved the folder containing my deed from the study drawer. Margaret Ellis, sole owner. I traced Thomas's old signature on the earlier documents. For the first time in years, I locked the drawer afterward, not out of habit, out of instinct. Weeks passed. Then one Saturday morning, Emmett approached me with an unfamiliar seriousness. Margaret, he said, he had gradually stopped calling me Mrs. Ellis, have you ever considered estate planning? The question felt oddly intimate. I have a will, I replied. When was it last updated? After Thomas passed, he nodded slowly. Life evolves, it might be wise to revisit it, avoid complications later. Complications? His tone was measured, almost professional, too professional. I see no urgency, I said. He smiled politely. Just looking out for the family. Family. The word warmed and unsettled me at once. That evening, I noticed Marin watching us both from the sofa, her expression unreadable, as if she were witnessing a conversation she could not quite stop. Then came the moment I could no longer dismiss as imagination. I had invited my neighbor Ruth over for tea, something we did often. As she admired the kitchen, she said lightly, your son must be proud to have such a beautiful home. Before I could answer, Emmett chuckled from the doorway. Thank you. We've put a lot into it already. We put a lot into it. Ruth smiled at him. I did not. Later, after she left, I stood alone at the sink, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. For the first time since Thomas died. I did not feel entirely safe in my own house. Not threatened, not yet, just displaced. Like a photograph slowly being edged out of its frame. That night, sleep refused me again. Around 2 a.m., I heard muffled voices from Marin and Emmett's room. You need to talk to her, Emmett whispered. It's not that simple, Marin replied. We can't wait forever. Wait for what? My heart beat harder than it should have. The next morning, Marin avoided my eyes and Emmett was unusually cheerful. When unease becomes pattern, wisdom asks us to pay attention. I began making quiet observations then, not accusations, just noticing. And what I noticed was that temporary had begun behaving very much like permanent. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when hospitality stops feeling like kindness and begins to feel like erasure. I recognized that moment on a cool October morning. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and a thin fog hovered just above the lawn. I wrapped my cardigan tighter as I stepped outside to retrieve the newspaper. Except there was no newspaper. In its place sat a small plastic box mounted beside the mailbox. A lockbox. I stared at it, confused. Emmett appeared behind me, already dressed for work, coffee steaming in a travel mug. "Oh good," he said casually. "You saw it." "Saw what exactly?" "The secure mailbox. Porch theft has been rising. This keeps everything safe." He pulled a small key from his pocket and demonstrated the lock with the pride of a man unveiling an improvement. "I've got the spare," he added. Spare, meaning he held the original. "I would have appreciated being asked," I said quietly. He gave a small shrug. "Didn't want to bother you with details?" "Details." The ownership of my own mail had been reduced to a detail. I said nothing more, but something inside me shifted, not loudly, not angrily, just a quiet realignment. Like a spine remembering it was meant to stand straight. Over the next week, more details appeared. The Wi-Fi password changed. I discovered this while trying to order bulbs for the garden. When I asked Marin, she looked startled. "Oh, Emmett updated the router, better security. And the password?" She hesitated. "I'll text it to you." Text it? In my own home? I smiled gently so she would not see the sting. That evening, I sat alone in the den where Thomas used to read, listening to the faint murmur of Emmett's voice downstairs as he spoke confidently about optimizing household systems. Optimizing. The language of efficiency, not of belonging. A few days later, the first true confrontation arrived, though at the time it wore the disguise of practicality. Emmett knocked lightly on my study door. "Do you have a minute?" I closed the book in my lap, of course. He entered carrying a slim folder, always folders now. Inside were printed documents, neatly tabbed. "I spoke with a financial planner this week," he began. My stomach tightened. "For whom?" I asked. "For us." Us. "There are significant tax advantages," he continued smoothly, "if the property is placed into a family trust. It protects assets and avoids probate delays." He slid a page toward me. I did not touch it. "I'm not interested in restructuring ownership," I said calmly. His expression did not change, but something cooled behind his eyes. "It wouldn't change your day-to-day life at all. That may be, but it is still my decision." A pause stretched between us, then he leaned forward slightly. "You know, Margaret Marin is your only child. Eventually this house will be hers." "Eventually again?" "Yes," I replied. "Eventually?" He nodded once, as if confirming a point in an argument I had not agreed to join. "Planning ahead is responsible. And patience," I said gently, "is also responsible." For the first time since I had known him, Emmett looked faintly irritated. He gathered the papers without another word, but as he left I noticed something new in his posture. Less guest, more claimant. That night Marin knocked softly on my bedroom door. She perched on the edge of the bed the way she used to after childhood nightmares. "Mom, Emmett means well, does he?" I asked quietly. She sighed. "He worries about stability. You already have stability." She looked down at her hands. Rent kept going up. "Jobs change, but this house, it's security." I studied her face, older now, lined with concerns she tried to hide. "Security for whom?" I asked gently. Her eyes glistened. "For our future children, maybe for us, for family." Family, the word again. I reached for her hand. "Sweetheart, are you asking me to give you this house?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Not now, just consider making things simpler later." Later, always later, yet the pressure lived firmly in the present. I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Marin, has Emmett been pushing this?" She did not answer. Silence can be louder than confession. After she left, I walked slowly through the hallway. Family photographs lined the walls, Marin missing her front teeth, Thomas holding her on his shoulders, Christmas mornings frozen in laughter. I wondered suddenly, did Emmett see these memories, or only square footage? The next escalation came quietly but struck deeper than all the others. I returned from my bridge club one afternoon to find the study locked. Locked, my study. I tried the handle again, certain it must be a mistake. Emmett appeared moments later. "Oh, meant to tell you," he said. "I moved my work equipment in there, needed a proper office." "You locked it, confidential files?" My voice remained calm, though my pulse did not. "That room holds personal documents. I reorganized them, much more efficient now." Reorganized without permission. I inhaled slowly. "Please unlock it." He held my gaze a moment longer than politeness required. Then he fetched the key. Inside, everything looked orderly, too orderly, drawers relabeled, folders aligned in unfamiliar categories. Even Thomas's old fountain pen had been relocated. I felt like a visitor inside my own history. "Emmett," I said quietly, "do not move my things again." He offered a thin smile. "Of course." but something told me the boundary had already been tested and noted. The tension thickened after that, not openly, just beneath the surface, like ice forming on a pond. Then came the evening that changed how I saw everything. Rain fell steadily, turning the windows into mirrors. We were finishing dinner when Emmett cleared his throat. "There's something we should discuss as a household." The phrase alone made my shoulders stiffen. He folded his hands. "I think it's time we formalize living arrangements." I set down my fork. "What does that mean?" "It means clarity, expectations, long-term vision." Marin stared at her plate. Emmett continued. "We've been contributing significantly, groceries, upgrades, maintenance. It would be reasonable to outline everyone's stake." Stake, the word landed heavily. "This is not a business," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "It's an asset." The room fell silent. Even Poppy stopped chewing beneath the table. I looked at my daughter. She still would not meet my eyes. Something inside me, something patient, something long-suffering, finally spoke. "This house is mine," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. Emmett nodded slowly. For now, two small words, yet they carried the weight of a future he had already imagined. In that moment, the unease that had followed me for weeks hardened into certainty. This was no longer generosity being stretched. It was ownership being rehearsed. And for the first time, I began to wonder just how far Emmett intended to go. The sentence lingered long after dinner ended. For now, 2 words should not have the power to chill a room, and yet that night they did. I washed the dishes slowly, aware of the quiet movements behind me. Marin loading the dishwasher without her usual humming. Emmett wiping the counter with deliberate precision as though nothing unusual had been said. But homes remember tension. Even the air felt heavier. When I finally went upstairs, I did not turn on the television as I usually did before bed. Instead, I sat in the dim glow of my bedside lamp and tried to understand what my instincts were telling me. There is a difference between imagination and intuition. Imagination invents fear. Intuition recognizes pattern, and the pattern now was unmistakable. The following morning, something happened that removed the last veil of doubt. I came downstairs earlier than usual, drawn awake by unfamiliar voices. 2 men stood in the foyer wearing navy jackets with embroidered logos. One held a clipboard. Emmett was speaking to them confidently. "Yes, the foundation is original, but it's in excellent condition," he was saying. I stopped halfway down the stairs. "Emmett?" He turned, surprised but not embarrassed. "Oh, Margaret, good timing. Who are they?" "Structural assessors," he replied calmly. "Just getting a professional opinion." "On what?" The property, my hand tightened around the banister. "You arranged an inspection without telling me?" "It's informational," he said. "No obligation." One of the men smiled politely at me. "Beautiful home you have," he said. I forced a nod. Emmett gestured toward the basement door. "We'll start down here," as if permission had already been granted. "No," I said. The word surprised even me, not loud but immovable. Emmett blinked. "I'm sorry, you will not inspect this house today." A silence followed, not awkward but electric. The assessors exchanged a glance. Emmett stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're overreacting. I am establishing a boundary." His jaw shifted slightly. "It's just due diligence. It is my house." Another pause. Then, with visible restraint, he turned to the men. "Gentlemen, I apologize. We'll reschedule." They gathered their things quickly, murmuring polite farewells. When the door closed, the quiet rang louder than any argument. Emmett faced me. "You embarrassed me." I held his gaze. "You presumed authority that is not yours." For a moment, something flashed across his face, not anger exactly, but calculation. Then Marin appeared at the top of the stairs, robe clutched tightly. "What's going on?" "Your husband scheduled a structural inspection without my knowledge," I said evenly. Marin looked at Emmett. He spoke first. "I was thinking long-term, that's all." She hesitated. "Maybe next time just mention it." "Mention it, not ask, mention." I suddenly felt very tired. Later that afternoon, I drove to the bank, not out of panic, out of clarity. I asked the manager to confirm that all property-related accounts remained solely in my name. They did. Still, I added extra authentication measures. It felt strangely like locking a door in a neighborhood that had always felt safe. When I returned home, Emmett was assembling something large in the garage. Metal shelving units, boxes labeled house records. "I thought we could centralize documents," he explained. "I prefer my records where they've always been." He gave a tight smile. "Decentralization leads to confusion." Control prevents it, I replied softly. Our eyes met. Neither of us looked away first. That night, Marin knocked on my door again, but this time she did not sit. She paced. Mom, Emmett feels like you don't trust him. I chose my words carefully. Trust grows from respect. He respects you. Does he respect that this is my home? She stopped pacing. You make it sound like we're intruders. The word stung because I had never thought of my daughter that way. You are my child, I said gently. You will never be an intruder, but sometimes love requires remembering where one life ends and another begins. Tears filled her eyes. He just wants us to feel secure. Marin, do you feel insecure here? She opened her mouth, closed it, and in that silence I heard the answer. Days passed with a brittle politeness. Emmett no longer spoke about renovations or trusts. But the quiet felt strategic, not peaceful, like a chess player waiting. Then one gray Thursday afternoon, the mail brought a thick envelope addressed to Emmett Whitaker, official looking. He opened it at the kitchen island while I prepared tea. I noticed the letterhead upside down, a mortgage lender. My pulse stumbled. Planning something? I asked lightly. He folded the document too quickly, just exploring options. Options for what? But I did not ask, not yet, because by then I had begun observing more carefully than he realized. The discovery came sooner than I expected. It was purely accidental, or perhaps, as I now believe, inevitable. Marin had left her laptop open on the dining table while rushing to work. A notification blinked softly on the screen. Normally, I would never look. Privacy is a dignity I value deeply. But the subject line caught my eye before I could turn away. Pre-qualification, property transfer discussion. My chest tightened. I told myself to walk away. Instead, I sat. The email thread was already open. Emmett had written, my mother-in-law is elderly and prefers minimal involvement in financial matters. We currently reside in the home and handle most operational costs. What pathways exist for transitioning ownership smoothly? Elderly, minimal involvement, transitioning ownership. Each phrase landed like a quiet blow. The lender's reply outlined possibilities, refinancing after a title change, co-ownership structures, even legal mechanisms that could simplify eventual transfer. Eventual, always eventual. But the planning was happening now. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the laptop. I did not cry. Shock at my age rarely looks dramatic. It looks like stillness. That evening I studied Emmett across the dinner table. The steady posture, the measured tone, the confidence of a man building a future he believed inevitable. Had he convinced himself already, or worse, had he convinced Marin? When she reached for his hand absent-mindedly, I noticed something else. She looked anxious, not ambitious, not entitled. Anxious, and that frightened me more than anything, because pressure inside a marriage often hides behind agreement. I slept very little that night, around 3 a.m. I rose and walked quietly through the house. Moonlight traced familiar shapes, the staircase Thomas once sanded by hand, the framed quilt my mother stitched decades ago. I placed my palm against the living room wall. This house had held births, deaths, laughter, illness, forgiveness. It was not simply property, it was continuity. And for the first time since Emmett arrived, a thought formed with unmistakable clarity. I might have to fight for my own home, not loudly, not cruelly, but firmly, because kindness without boundaries invites erasure. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I would stop reacting and start preparing. Emmett believed he was planning the future. What he did not yet understand was that I had lived long enough to recognize quiet takeovers, and I was not nearly as fragile as he seemed to think. The morning after I read Emmett's email, I woke with a calm I had not felt in weeks. Not peace, clarity. There is a powerful difference between the two. Peace is something we hope for. Clarity is something we choose. I brewed my coffee slowly and stood by the bay window as sparrows quarreled in the maple tree, exactly as they had for nearly 2 decades. The ordinary rhythm steadied me. Fear had visited, but it had not unpacked its bags. By 9 o'clock, I was dressed and driving across town to an office park I had passed hundreds of times without ever entering. The brass plaque beside the glass door read, Harper & Cole, Estate and Property Law. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. A young receptionist offered tea. I declined. My hands were steady, but my thoughts required all my attention. When the attorney Janet Cole greeted me, her handshake was warm, not overly familiar, not rushed, just competent. What brings you in today, Mrs. Ellis? I hesitated only a moment. I believe someone may be planning to take my house while I am still living in it. She did not look surprised. That alone comforted me more than I expected. Over the next hour, I explained everything: the inspection attempt, the trust suggestion, the email. Janet listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she folded her hands. First, she said calmly, you are in a strong legal position. The deed is solely yours. No one can transfer ownership without your explicit consent. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slipped free. However, she continued, there are behaviors worth addressing early. Informal occupancy can sometimes create complicated expectations, if not legally, then emotionally. Emotionally, yes. That is why boundaries matter, she said. Boundaries, such a simple word, such difficult work. Janet outlined several protective steps. Update my will immediately. Establish a living trust with clear terms. Document that Emmett and Maren were temporary occupants, not tenants, not co-owners. Most importantly, communicate expectations in writing. Silence, she added gently, is often mistaken for agreement. I thought of all the moments I had chosen politeness over firmness. No more. Before leaving, I asked one final question. If conflict comes, how do I handle it without destroying my relationship with my daughter? Janet's expression softened. You don't control whether conflict comes, only whether you meet it with dignity. Dignity, the word settled into me like an anchor. When I returned home, Emmett's car was gone. Maren sat at the kitchen table, staring into a mug long emptied of tea. She looked up quickly. You were out early. I had an appointment. She studied my face. Something in her posture suggested she already sensed change. Mom, are we all right? I sat beside her. Sweetheart, has Emmett been discussing ownership with you? Her eyes filled almost instantly. I didn't want it to feel like pressure. So it was true. How long? I asked gently. A few months. Months. While I watered roses and hosted Sunday dinners, a future without my consent had been quietly drafted. He says it's practical, she whispered. That eventually everything will be mine anyway, so why wait for a crisis? And what do you believe? She struggled with the answer. I believe I don't want to lose you over a house. The simplicity of it broke my heart more than anger ever could. I covered her hand with mine. You won't lose me, but Maren, love cannot survive where entitlement grows. She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask what I had avoided. Is Emmett in financial trouble? Her silence answered again. Finally, she whispered, some investments went badly last year. He never told many people. Now pieces aligned. Security was not theoretical for him. It was urgent, but urgency does not grant ownership of another person's life. That evening, I began the letter, not emotional, not accusatory, clear. Janet had been very specific about that. I printed 2 copies and placed them neatly on the dining table before dinner. Emmett noticed them immediately. What's this? A household agreement, I said calmly. Maren's shoulders stiffened. Emmett opened the document, his eyes moving quickly. The letter stated, Maren and Emmett were welcome guests for a defined 6-month period. The property remained solely mine. No inspections, financial inquiries, or structural changes were permitted without written approval. A modest monthly contribution would be accepted but would not create tenancy. A move-out timeline would begin at the end of the 6 months. When Emmett finished reading, the air itself seemed to pause. You went to a lawyer, he said quietly. Yes, you don't trust me. I am protecting my home. He placed the paper down with controlled care. This feels hostile. It is clarity. Maren looked between us, pale. Emmett leaned forward slightly. You're overreacting to exploratory conversations. Exploratory conversations with lenders about transferring my property are not small matters. For the first time since I had known him, Emmett's composure cracked. You're making me sound predatory. I am describing behavior. Silence stretched long enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Finally, he spoke again, softer but sharper. Do you know what instability does to a marriage? Renting year after year, watching housing prices climb beyond reach? I held his gaze. Yes, I also know what it means to lose everything suddenly. That is why this house exists, because Thomas and I protected it. Something flickered in his eyes at Thomas's name. Perhaps he realized then that he was not negotiating with a naive widow, but with a woman who had survived grief and rebuilt herself from its quiet rubble. Maren whispered, Emmett, maybe the agreement is reasonable. He looked at her, truly looked, and disappointment crossed his face before he masked it. You're siding with this? This is my mother, and I am your husband. The words hung heavily, marriage, blood, two loyalties pulling in opposite directions. I spoke gently. No one is choosing sides, we are choosing respect. Emmett stood abruptly. I need air. The back door closed harder than necessary. Maren covered her face. I hate this. So do I said softly, but sometimes discomfort is the sound boundaries make when they first appear. Over the next week, Emmett became impeccably polite. Too polite. The kind of politeness that signals retreat, not surrender. He signed the agreement without comment, yet I sensed something gathering beneath the surface. Then, one afternoon, Ruth knocked on my door again. I hope you don't mind, she said, stepping inside, but I thought you should know Emmett introduced himself at the neighborhood association meeting yesterday. I frowned slightly. He said he was representing the household. Asked detailed questions about zoning and long-term property values. Representing. The word felt strangely theatrical. Thank you for telling me, I said. After she left, I stood very still in the foyer. Emmett was not letting go of the future he had imagined. He was simply adjusting his approach. That evening, as I passed the study, I noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, Emmett spoke on the phone again, voice low. Yes, she's resistant, he was saying. But circumstances change, they always do. A pause. No, she's healthy now, but planning is about timing. Timing. The calm certainty in his voice sent a cold awareness through me. He was waiting for what I did not yet know. But for the first time, a thought surfaced that unsettled me deeply. Emmett wasn't just hoping to inherit this house someday. He was strategizing. And strategies once formed rarely dissolve on their own. After the household agreement was signed, the atmosphere inside the house changed in a way that was difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. Everything became quieter, not peaceful quiet, careful quiet. Emmett no longer spoke about property values or long-term plans. He stopped suggesting improvements. Even the metal shelving in the garage remained untouched, as if waiting for a purpose that had been postponed. On the surface, one might have called it respect. But when respect arrives too suddenly, it often carries the scent of strategy. I reminded myself daily of something Janet had said, watch patterns, not performances. So I watched, and what I began to see troubled me more than open conflict ever could. One chilly November morning, I went downstairs earlier than usual and found Emmett sitting at the dining table with Maren. Her eyes were red. She looked up quickly when she saw me, forcing a small smile. Morning, Mom. Emmett's expression was composed, but something in his shoulders was tight. Everything all right? I asked gently. Maren nodded too quickly, just tired. But later that afternoon, I found her alone in the laundry room, folding towels with mechanical precision. Sweetheart, I said softly, talk to me. The towel slipped from her hands. He lost more money. The words came out barely above a whisper. How much? She swallowed. Almost everything we had saved for a down payment. Now the urgency made sense, not ambition, not entitlement, fear. Fear wears many disguises, but at its core it is simply the terror of falling with nothing to catch you. Does he have debt? I asked carefully. A little, she admitted. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare him. I rested a hand on her arm. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want you to think he married me for security. Her voice broke on the last word. Oh, my child, love makes us protective, sometimes even of the people who are hurting us. I don't think that, I said gently, but financial fear can push good people toward poor decisions. She nodded silently, then she said something that chilled me more than any email ever had. He keeps saying that once the house is settled, everything else will stabilize. Settled. As if my home were a loose account waiting to be closed. That evening, Emmett behaved as though nothing were wrong. He even brought home takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, a gesture so thoughtful it might have fooled someone who had not been paying attention. Halfway through dinner, he set his chopsticks down. I've been thinking, he began calmly, about the 6-month timeline. Here it was again, the future. I believe moving twice in 1 year would be disruptive, he continued, especially if Maren becomes pregnant. Maren looked startled. Emmett, what? He said lightly, we've talked about it. He turned to me. A child deserves stability from the beginning. I met his gaze steadily. A child also deserves parents who build their own foundation. A faint shadow crossed his face. You speak as though we're avoiding responsibility. I'm suggesting that responsibility includes independence. The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered long after the containers were cleared away. December arrived with early darkness and the smell of wood smoke drifting through the neighborhood. For years, I had hosted a small holiday gathering, nothing extravagant, just neighbors, a few former colleagues, warm cider, soft music. I nearly canceled it that year. But then I realized something important: retreat shrinks a life. And I had no intention of shrinking inside my own home. So I decorated as I always did. Marin helped string lights along the banister, and for a moment it felt like old times. Then Emmett descended the stairs carrying a large framed print. "What's that?" I asked. "Our family name," he said. The print read, "The WHITKRS established 2023. He positioned it above the entry console. I stared at it. "My name is Ellis," I said quietly. He smiled. "Your family? Family should feel like inclusion, not replacement. Please take it down," I said. For the first time in weeks, his patience thinned. "It's decorative." "It is declarative." Our eyes locked. After a long moment, Marin stepped forward and lifted the frame off the wall herself. "We don't need it," she said softly. Emmett said nothing, but the look he gave her was not one I had seen before. It was the look of a man realizing his influence was no longer unquestioned. The holiday party came and went without incident, at least on the surface. Yet near the end of the evening, as guests gathered their coats, my neighbor Harold clapped Emmett on the shoulder. "You've got a beautiful place here," he said warmly. Emmett opened his mouth. I spoke first. "Thank you," I said. "Thomas and I loved raising our daughter here." A small correction delivered gently, but publicly. Emmett's smile held, though it no longer reached his eyes. Later that night, after everyone had gone, the confrontation finally arrived. "You undermined me," he said quietly in the kitchen. I clarified reality. "You could have let it pass and allow a false narrative to grow." "No." His voice sharpened. "I am your daughter's husband. That makes this my home too. You are welcome here," I replied calmly, "but welcome is not ownership." He exhaled slowly, fighting for composure. "You think I'm trying to steal something? I think you are trying to secure something that is not yours to secure." Silence. Then, with surprising candor, he said, "Do you know what it feels like to work for years and still be locked out of the housing market? To watch others sit on properties worth fortunes while younger families scramble?" There it was, not greed, resentment. Resentment can grow quietly inside otherwise decent people until it convinces them the world owes them correction. "I sympathize with struggle," I said gently, "but sympathy does not transfer deeds." He looked at me for a long moment. And then he said something that revealed far more than he intended. "You won't live here forever." The words landed softly, but their meaning thundered. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I studied the man before me, this man who had once washed dishes to impress me, who now spoke with the calm certainty of eventual possession. "You're right," I said at last. "I won't. None of us stay anywhere forever." He seemed almost relieved by my agreement. But then I continued, "That is precisely why what we build and protect matters." For the first time, Emmett had no reply. That night I updated my trust, not out of spite, out of wisdom. The house would one day go to Marin, but with protections Emmett could neither influence nor accelerate. And I added something else Janet suggested, a provision allowing me full authority over residency at all times. No ambiguity, no assumptions. As I signed the papers, an unexpected feeling rose within me, not anger, strength. The quiet strength that comes when fear is replaced by preparation. When I returned home, snow had begun falling, soft, deliberate, covering the lawn in fragile white. I stood at the window and watched it gather. Homes, like winters, reveal truths slowly, and though Emmett did not yet know it, the ground beneath his plans had already begun to shift. The first heavy snow of January arrived overnight. By morning, the world outside my windows looked softened, edges blurred, rooftops draped in quiet white, the maple branches bowing gently under the weight. Snow has a way of making everything appear peaceful, even when it is. I was halfway through buttering toast when I noticed Emmett standing very still at the kitchen counter, staring at his phone, not scrolling, reading. His jaw was tight. Marin entered moments later, still tying the sash of her robe. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the screen toward her. "I just received an alert from a credit monitoring service," he said flatly. "A new legal trust has been registered connected to this address." Marin blinked. "A trust?" He looked directly at me. "You restructured the property." It was not a question. Yes, I replied calmly. I updated my estate plan. The silence that followed felt almost ceremonial, like the air before a verdict. You didn't think to discuss this? He asked. I didn't need permission. His composure fractured then, not explosively, but enough that the careful mask slipped. You're deliberately cutting us out. I am protecting what your behavior suggested needed protection. Marin's eyes moved between us rapidly. Mom, what does the trust say? It ensures the house remains mine for as long as I live, I answered gently, and that its future cannot be pressured or accelerated by anyone. Emmett let out a short, humorless laugh. So that's it, you think I'm circling like a vulture? I think urgency can distort judgment. His voice rose, the first time I had ever heard it do so. We have done nothing but try to build stability by planning ownership of a house that is not yours. The refrigerator hummed loudly in the quiet. Outside, a plow scraped the street. Marin whispered, please stop, but something long restrained had finally surfaced. You're freezing your own daughter out, Emmett said. No, I replied steadily. I am refusing to be quietly replaced in my own life. That was the moment everything shifted from tension into truth. For several days afterward, Emmett barely spoke to me, not rudely, just with a cool civility that made every interaction feel transactional. Marin grew thinner with worry. I often found her staring into space, her tea untouched. One evening, I knocked softly on her door. She looked exhausted. I didn't know he'd react like this, she admitted. He feels cornered, I said gently. So do you, she replied. She wasn't wrong, but there is a difference between being cornered and standing your ground. Marin, I asked quietly, are you happy? The question seemed to surprise her. She sat very still for a long time before answering. I love him, she said finally. Love, always the first truth we offer. And, I prompted softly. She looked down. I don't like who we become when we talk about this house. Neither did I. The confrontation that ended everything came unexpectedly on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I returned from the pharmacy earlier than planned and noticed a sedan in the driveway I did not recognize. Through the front window, I saw Emmett sitting with a man in a charcoal overcoat. Papers were spread across the dining table. My pulse slowed, not with fear but with a strange, clarifying calm. I stepped inside. Emmett looked up sharply. You're home early. I see that you have a guest. The man stood politely. Good afternoon, I'm Victor Hale. He extended his hand. Real estate consultant. Consultant, I did not take the hand. What is a real estate consultant doing in my dining room? I asked quietly. Emmett exhaled. Margaret, please don't dramatize. Victor is advising us on long-term strategies. Us? Victor shifted uncomfortably. I was under the impression all homeowners were aware of this meeting, he said carefully. I am the homeowner, I replied. A heavy pause followed. Victor began gathering his papers. I believe I should go. Emmett stood. This is unnecessary. No, Victor said gently. This is not my place. Within seconds, he was gone, the door closed, and the house, my house, felt suddenly charged with a lifetime's worth of unspoken words. I turned to Emmett. You invited a property consultant here without my knowledge. It was a conversation. It was an assumption. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration finally unmasked. You refuse every attempt at planning. Because every plan begins with the premise that this house is becoming yours. Marin appeared at the foot of the stairs, pale. Emmett, tell me you weren't trying to structure something. He hesitated, too long. I was exploring pathways, he admitted. For when? I asked. For the future, the same word, always the future, never my present. You are trying to outweight me, I said quietly. That's not fair, isn't it? His voice sharpened. You're sitting on an asset that could transform our lives. And you are speaking about my life as if it is already concluded. The words seemed to echo. Marin covered her mouth. Stop, both of you! But years of patience had reached their natural boundary. Emmett, I said calmly, you have 30 days to find another place to live. The sentence hung in the air, irreversible the moment it existed. Marin gasped. Mom, Emmett stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're serious? Yes, you would throw your own daughter out into winter. My daughter is welcome to stay as long as she needs, I said softly, but you no longer respect the conditions required to remain here. His face flushed. You're breaking up a marriage. No, I replied. Your choices are straining it. For a moment, I thought he might shout. Instead, his voice dropped low. You'll regret this. I met his gaze without flinching. No, what I would regret is surrendering my home to avoid discomfort. Maren was crying now, silent tears that seemed to fracture something inside me. But boundaries are rarely painless. Emmett grabbed his coat. I need air. The door slammed behind him, rattling the holiday wreath still hanging there long after the season had passed. Maren sank into a chair. I never thought it would come to this. I knelt beside her. Neither did I. Where will he go? He is resourceful, I said gently. She looked at me through wet lashes. Are you? I squeezed her hand. I have had to be. Emmett moved out 26 days later, not 30. He packed efficiently, speaking little. On his final trip to the car, he paused in the foyer. You misjudged me, he said. Perhaps, I answered, but I did not misjudge the importance of protecting what was mine. He studied me one last time, then he left. The sound of his engine fading down the street felt less like victory and more like the exhale after holding one's breath too long. That night the house was quiet again, not the careful quiet, the old quiet, the kind that carries memory instead of tension. Maren remained. But something between us had shifted, not broken, just tender. Healing, I knew, would take time. Yet as I walked through each familiar room, I felt something return that I had not realized was slipping away. Belonging. After Emmett left, the house seemed to inhale. I noticed it the very next morning, not as a sound, homes do not literally breathe, but as a feeling. The kind you experience when a crowded room empties and the walls no longer press inward. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor uninterrupted. No unfamiliar briefcase by the door. No voice conducting quiet negotiations over coffee, just stillness, familiar stillness. The kind that had carried me through widowhood, through loneliness, through the slow rebuilding of a life I once thought was finished. I stood by the stove warming oatmeal and realized something unexpected. I did not feel triumphant, I felt steady. There is a profound difference. Triumph is loud. Steadiness is what remains when you choose yourself without apology. Maren slept late that morning. Grief is exhausting even when it is the right grief. When she finally came downstairs, her eyes were swollen but dry. I keep listening for his car, she admitted quietly. That will fade, I said gently. She nodded, wrapping both hands around a mug as if anchoring herself to something warm. For several days, we moved carefully around one another, two women adjusting to a house that felt both the same and entirely new. Then one evening, she spoke the question that had been hovering unasked. Mom, were you ever afraid I'd choose him over you? I considered the honesty of that. Yes, I said softly, but love is not a competition, it is a series of recognitions. She frowned slightly. I don't understand. You recognize when someone protects your peace, I explained, and you recognize when someone quietly erodes it. Tears gathered again, but this time they did not fall. I kept telling myself he was just scared, she whispered. He probably was, I said. Fear can convince people they are entitled to things they have not built. She looked around the kitchen, really looked, perhaps for the first time in months. I grew up here, she said. I should have defended it sooner. I reached across the table. You were defending your marriage, that is not weakness. For the first time since Emmett moved out, she smiled, small but real. The weeks that followed were gentle, not perfect, healing rarely is, but honest. Maren began meeting with a financial counselor. She picked up extra shifts at the clinic, determined to rebuild what had been lost. One afternoon, while we pruned the rose bushes together, she said something that made me pause. I used to think security meant never having to start over, she said. Now I think it means knowing you can. Wisdom often arrives disguised as heartbreak. You are stronger than you realize, I told her. She glanced toward the house. So are you. Winter loosened its grip slowly as it always does. Snow softened into slush, then into memory. One bright March morning, I opened the windows and let fresh air sweep through every room. With it went the last trace of tension. I repainted the study a warm cream instead of the heavy green Emmett had once called dated. Maren helped me choose new curtains. We laughed more easily now. Sometimes sorrow clears space for a lighter kind of joy. A month later, Maren sat me down at the same kitchen table where so many difficult conversations had unfolded. I've decided to file for separation, she said quietly. The words landed gently, not shocking, not dramatic, just inevitable. Are you certain? I asked. She nodded. I kept asking myself whether love should feel like negotiation. A pause. It shouldn't. No, it shouldn't. Does he know? I told him yesterday. And she exhaled slowly. He said I was choosing comfort over partnership. I tilted my head slightly. And what did you say? I told him I was choosing respect. A warmth spread through my chest then, not pride exactly, but recognition. My daughter had found her spine. Not because of me, but perhaps encouraged by example. Spring arrived in earnest soon after. The maple tree budded. Tulips pushed bravely through thawed soil, and on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Marin carried the last of Emmett's forwarded mail to the curb. She watched the postal truck disappear down the street, then turned to me. "It finally feels finished," she said. "Endings, I have learned, are rarely loud. They are simply the moment you stop expecting footsteps that no longer belong to your life." Months later, I hosted dinner again. Just a small gathering: Ruth, Harold, two former colleagues, and Marin. At one point, Ruth lifted her glass and said warmly, "Margaret, your home has always felt like a refuge." Refuge. I looked around the table at the laughter, the candlelight, the easy conversation. For the first time in a very long while, the word felt completely true again. After everyone left, Marin lingered by the doorway. "Thank you for not giving up this house," she said softly. I smiled. "Thank you for remembering it was never just a house." She hugged me then, the kind of hug that belongs to adulthood, where gratitude replaces assumption. And as I held my daughter, I understood something with profound clarity. Protecting what you have built is not selfish. It is an act of self-respect. And self-respect teaches others how to love you properly. Closing reflection now: when I sit by the bay window with my morning coffee, the sparrows still argue in the maple tree exactly as they always have. The floors still creak in familiar places. Thomas's laughter still seems to live somewhere deep inside these walls, but there is something new here too, a quiet assurance. I learned that kindness must walk hand in hand with boundaries, otherwise it slowly becomes permission. I learned that love does not require surrender, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that it is never too late to stand gently, firmly, and say, "This is my life, and it matters." So let me ask you something, dear listener. If someone began claiming pieces of the life you built slowly, politely, almost invisibly, would you notice? And would you have the courage to protect it? If this story touched you, share your thoughts. I read every one. And if you believe in stories about strength, dignity, and quiet resilience, I hope you'll stay, subscribe, and join me again. Because sometimes the most powerful battles are not fought loudly. They are simply the moments when a woman decides she will not disappear inside her own home.